And we want to thank everyone for making Camp Democracy available. David Swanson, Linda Weiner, Jay Cohn, Karen Bradley, Mike Hirsch. There are many people I'm going to forget. You'll have a chance if you look at the website to see who they are. Please do visit the website, campdemocracy.org. And to introduce our guest is someone who's been really a wonderful organizer here, Karen Bradley.
It was about 1972. I was a student at Boston University, and for some unexplained reason, I was sitting in Howard Zinn's office on a Monday evening. He had been a professor of mine earlier, and I forget how this happened, but we were sitting there, and he said, "You know, they've been mining Haiphong Harbor. Maybe we ought to think about mining Boston Harbor." And I was 19 years old, and I thought, oh my God. But we did do a number of things. We had a 24-hour teach-in, and that was a pretty amazing event. That was actually the first event I ever helped to organize. It was enough to stop me for the next 20 years, but it was a wonderful event. And I went off to Oregon to eat granola for a while. Came back, became a dance department chair and a theater person, and was at a dinner at Viva House in Baltimore when Howard Zinn leaned over the table and said to me, "You look familiar." And I said, "Yes, I was your student." Told him the story, and I told him what I was doing, and I said, "I have a theater company," and he said, "Oh, I've written a play." And it was one of those moments where you think, oh God, please let it be decent. And it was more than decent. It was a play about Emma Goldman called Emma. It's a wonderful play. I subsequently helped him to produce, and Andy actually produced it. I just helped get some personnel for him. Mark's in Soho. And I have spent the last, 30 or 40 years of my life being aware of Howard Zinn, and it is beyond an honor to introduce him to you all today. He's a master teacher, storyteller, wise man, and I am happy to bring him to you. Thank you.
You tell me, does it work? No. Can you hear me back there? How's okay. Hey, can you hear me back there? Oh, okay. That's all I need to know. Well, Karen, thanks very much. Actually, I forgot that I said we should mine Boston Harbor. I'm sort of shocked. Would I advocate breaking the law? Well, no. Please. Karen, yeah. In fact, I didn't remember what kind of a student Karen was. She probably was okay. But I do remember her as a theater person, and she's a very, very good theater person. She did a great job on my play, Emma, about Emma Goldman, and then worked on Marx in Soho, as she was saying, with Andy Shalal. You all know Andy Shalal? Yeah. Yeah? You know his restaurant, Busboys and Poets? Yeah, and I'm going to go there and eat after this. In fact, that's why I'm here. But since I was coming to his restaurant to eat, I figured, well, I may as well come here to Camp Democracy. it's been a wonderful thing that people have been doing here, camping out here, sort of planting a kind of an oasis of truth inside this enormous configuration of lies that we are getting from the White House and the Capitol and the Supreme Court and the FBI and all the other institutions of government. I'm trying to think of an institution of government that doesn't lie. Well, maybe if you go into the Library of Congress, you can find some truthful documents that the government is withholding from us, you know. So, no, I think this is, you know, a manifestation of yes, democracy. We don't get democracy from the government. We don't get democracy from the branches of government. You don't get democracy in the way they told us in junior high school you get democracy. You know, I remember sitting there in junior high school and them saying, you know, we live in a democratic government and I will prove it to you. We will put the elements of democracy on the blackboard, you know, and the executive, the judicial, the legislative, the three branches of government, and then we have checks and balances. And I remember how impressive that was. They would draw lines between the legislative and, you know, nothing could go wrong. Because if anything went wrong, another part of the government would check it. And then I learned, after I got out of high school and I began looking around at the world, that everything went wrong. So it must be that they didn't really know what democracy was when they told us that. And it took me a while myself to figure out what democracy was. And my first teaching job after I came out of the Air Force and out of the shipyard. I was a shipyard worker at the age of 18 and an Air Force bombardier at the age of 21, and which makes me very interested in bombing, and I, with a kind of class-conscious person as a result of working in a shipyard, and I was a very war-conscious person as a result of being a bombardier. And my first teaching job was in the South at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, a black women's college. And I was there in those years of what is called the movement. The years from I was there for 7 years with my family, my wife Roz, who is here now, and our kids, and that's when I learned about democracy, because I could see how black people in the South were experiencing democracy. That is, they weren't. There were the three branches of government, and the three branches of government were doing nothing about racial segregation and daily humiliation and indignities. Those branches of government that were presented to us as democracy were not doing anything about democracy or equality or justice. And so what happened is the black people decided they had to do it themselves, and that's what happened. And they sat in and they demonstrated and they committed civil disobedience, and yes, they broke the law again and again, and they created a great movement which swept the country and which embarrassed the government of the United States before the world. This is a very important quality that movements need. They need the weapon of embarrassment. Of course, there are some members of government who cannot be embarrassed, who seem never to be embarrassed. No matter how embarrassing they are, they're not embarrassed. So it gives us a bigger job to do. But I learned that democracy was not what government does. I learned that democracy was what people do when they organize, and they get together and they take risks and they break the law if necessary, and they bring their message to the nation and to the world. And only then do the organs of government, in embarrassment or in fear or in trepidation of something worse happening to them, only then do they react, and maybe they pass a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act, and maybe then the segregation signs come down and something happens. So yes, it was a lesson. That's when democracy comes alive, when people do that. And then I saw it again in the movement against the war in Vietnam. And so I'm sure many of the people here, went through that movement. And there, too, we saw a government which was not only silent in the face of injustice, but a government who was committing crimes in Southeast Asia and killing enormous numbers of people. And I mean, those 58,000 names here on the Vietnam Memorial are testament to the crimes committed by the government, and those names that don't appear on any wall here, the names of all the several million Vietnamese and Cambodians and Laotians who died, they also are testament to the criminality of the government. And the only thing that brought democracy alive in those years were the people who created the movement against the war. And one of the things that I learned from both of those movements, that is from the movement against racial injustice and from the movement against the war in Vietnam, was that movements start with events like this. That is, they start with small groups of people who get together, and you think, oh, nobody's listening to us, and the press isn't paying any attention to us, and we're not getting any attention on television, and so on, and what in the world are we doing? But the fact is that if there's a certain power to truth, there's a power to truth-telling, there's a power to bearing witness, there's a power in what people do that cannot be described, and it cannot be measured, and it grows and grows. And it turns out that the power that governments have, like and the powers that corporations have, the power of wealth and the power of arms and guns, that power ultimately depends on the obedience of people. And when people stop obeying, when people stop doing what they want us to do, when soldiers begin resisting, and this is what happened during the Vietnam War. Maybe the most crucial thing that happened in the Vietnam War was that young people refused to be drafted, soldiers began to desert, soldiers in the field in Vietnam began to commit violence against their own officers, began to refuse, B-52 pilots began to refuse to fly missions over Hanoi and Haiphong. And at a certain point, the government was unable to carry on the war. The people in power need the compliance of the citizenry in order to do their things, just like powerful corporations need their workers to do the work in order for them to keep making a profit. And when the workers go out on strike and the workers don't work anymore, then no matter how powerful a corporation is, whether it's General Motors or Ford or whatever, they can't function anymore. And that's when democracy comes alive. So this gathering here, is to me part of that phenomenon which we see again and again in history, of people beginning to gather together, and of the truth being uttered in places like this. And after all, this isn't the only place. All over the country, we know that there are gatherings, there are things that are going on, there are vigils, and there are picket lines, and there are people who are not doing anything and who are silent, who are not joining the vigils and not joining the picket lines, but who are more and more and more opposed to what the government is doing, more and more opposed to the killing that's going on, to the war. And what happens in the course of time is that the people who are understanding for the first time what is happening but who aren't doing anything, they begin to do something. They begin to join the people who are active, and the movement grows, and at a certain point, despite all the apparent powerlessness of people that seem to be true at the beginning, that power grows and grows, and something changes. So that's why I welcome what's going on here. Women, I know, have played a very special part in this. I know, Code Pink and other women's organizations have played a very special part in what's happening here in Washington. And it reminded me about the special part that women have played throughout history in social movements, in movements of rebellion. It reminded me that women have a special power. I mean, here, they seem to have the power, those people up there, those people out there. I don't know where they are. I'm looking for them. But somewhere, they're there somewhere behind barbed wire, I think. Yeah, they're worried, yeah. They have apparently, they have all this power. And we have the problem of creating a different kind of power. And there's certain aspects of any movement that have a special power. I think artists have a special power. I think musicians and poets and writers, and I think they have a special power. And I think women have a special power. And women have a particular power with regard to war because of who women are, and because they are the mothers of young people who go to war, or the wives of people who go to war, and because they usually are not the war makers themselves. And so I think from way back, from the Greek playwrights, from the Trojan women, I mean, think of it, hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ, you have Greek plays talking about it's the women who are speaking out against the war. You have Lysistrata, in which the women, in their own special way, speak out against the war. And I remember one of the things that happened in connection with the present war in Iraq, is some of you may remember this, maybe some of you participated in it, that there were showings of the play Lysistrata. Do you all know about that? Yeah, there were showings of the play Lysistrata that took place all over the world, or just around the same time. It was a very, very powerful moment. And so, women have always been a part of social movements, part of peace movements, and part of other movements. Women were among the first strikers in this country, the textile mill workers in New England in the 1830s. Before there was any national labor movement, women were going on strike in the textile mills of New England. Women played an important part in the black women and white women and the movement against slavery and all those acts of resistance in which slaves who had escaped to the north, and this is the time of the 1850s and the Fugitive Slave Act, and the slave hunters from the south were looking for escaped slaves, and men and women, black and white, in the north played a very important part in rescuing slaves from the officials who are going to bring them back to their masters. And at the end of the Civil War, you notice I'm bringing you year by year through American history. This won't take long. I'm up to the 19th century. Just think about it. But it's, the labor, women in the labor movement. When I was reading some of this stuff lately, and I was reading, the amazingly eloquent statements of the women in the populist movement, of the farmers' movement of the 1880s and 1890s, and almost scary in their boldness and the things that they said. I actually brought some of this with me. Do you mind if I want you to hear their words, because their words are better than mine. I can't match them. And so, you should listen to them rather than to me. And I was ever hear of Mary Elizabeth Lease? Most people have not heard of her. And if you go to school and go to college or go to graduate school and get a PhD, you will have never heard of her. I doubt it. But she was an amazing woman, and she one of the organizers of the farmers in the 1880s and 1890s in what was called the People's Party. And I was just looking at something that she, in her one of her speeches, and she said, "It's amazing to me how these people were full of hope. These people were full of exultation, and because they had a vision of a different way in which people could live." She said, "Let no one for a moment believe that this uprising of the people is but a passing episode in politics. We seek to put into practical operation the teachings and precepts of Jesus of Nazareth. Crowns will fall, thrones will tremble, kingdoms will disappear, the divine right of kings and the divine right of capital will fade away like the mists of the morning, when the angel of liberty shall kindle the fires of justice in the hearts of men. No more millionaires and no more paupers, no more gold kings, silver kings, and oil kings, and no more little waifs of humanity starving for a crust of bread. No more gaunt-faced, hollow-eyed girls in the factories. No more little boys reared in poverty and crime for the penitentiaries and the gallows. But we shall have the golden age when the farmers shall be prosperous and happy, dwelling under their own vine and fig tree, when the laborer shall have that for which he toils, when men shall be just and generous, little less than gods, and women shall be just and charitable toward each other, little less than angels, when we shall have not a government of the people by capitalists, but a government of the people by the people." Anyway, that's pretty good, isn't it? And then there was Mother Jones, and did you know, some people actually think that Mother Jones is just the name of a magazine. You see, it's funny how things, but generally people in movements know about Mother Jones. And how many of you know about Mother Jones? Well, you see, some of you don't. I noticed some of you. So I don't care that some of you already know all about her. I'm going to tell you about her anyway. You see. But she was, in her 80s, she was organizing miners in West Virginia and Colorado, and going to prison and defying the courts and defying the National Guard, and in 1903 she marched a whole bunch of children from the mines of Pennsylvania to New York to confront President Theodore Roosevelt. 100 miles. She marched these kids 100 miles, and where can I? She said, I asked some of the parents if they would let me have their little boys and girls for a week or 10 days, promising to bring them back safe and sound. That's a big babysitting job. They consented. A man named Sweeney was marshal for our army. A few men and women went with me to help with the children. They were on strike, and I thought they may as well have a little recreation. The children carried knapsacks on their backs, which had a knife and a fork, a tin cup, and a plate. We took along a wash boiler in which to cook the food on the road. One little fellow had a drum and another had a fife. That was our band. We carried banners that said, "We want more schools. We want time to play. Prosperity is here. Where is ours?" I remember Mother Jones, when she was in court, she was irrepressible. She had no respect for the judge. She would say, "I would address you as your honor if I thought you had any." No. And then we had, women in the anti-war movement. in World War One, women played an amazing part in the. A lot of people don't know about Helen Keller in the anti-war movement. How many people know about Helen Keller generally? How many people know about Helen Keller in the anti-war movement? Not too many. That's what I count on. If all of you said you knew this, what would I say? Nothing to say. But it's interesting about education. Interesting about education in the United States. Everybody learns about Helen Keller, really, right? This brave, girl who overcame all of these problems that she had, and not being able to see and hear. And everybody learns about her. They don't learn. They don't teach in school about Helen Keller as a socialist. Helen Keller as a radical. Helen Keller as an anti-war agitator. They don't tell that Helen Keller refused to cross a picket line to go to the theater where they were showing a play about her, you see. And this was from a speech she made on the eve of the United States entering the war, when she could see what was happening, the United States preparing to enter the war, just as people in this country on February 15th in 2003, on the eve, knowing the United States was about to enter the war, people spoke out and demonstrated against the war. And Helen Keller said, "We are facing a grave crisis in our national life. A few who profit from the labor of the masses want to organize the workers into an army which will protect the interests of the capitalists." How many people talk that way? Talk about capitalists? That's bad. You shouldn't use that word. You are urged to add to the heavy burdens you already bear the burden of a larger army and many additional warships. It is in your power to refuse. Congress is not preparing to defend the people of the United States. It is planning to protect the capital of American speculators and investors in Mexico, South America, China, and the Philippine Islands. Every modern war has its root in exploitation. And then there was Emma Goldman, right? We talked about Emma Goldman. And Emma Goldman went to prison for opposing World War I. As she had been in prison many, many times for various reasons, like advocating birth control or just because they felt like putting her in prison. She would be put in prison before she spoke somewhere, in anticipation of what she would say. Not because but they were probably right. But she said about World War I something that could very applicable, I think, today. We say that if America has entered the war to make the world safe for democracy, she must first make democracy safe in America. This whole the participation of women in the anti-war movement is so enormously important, and giving a lift to everybody else, and it's not just here. It's a worldwide phenomenon, and it's encouraging to see where women in other countries speak out against war and under very difficult circumstances. I remember when women in the Soviet Union were protesting the war in Afghanistan. Their sons were being sent to Afghanistan and were dying in Afghanistan, and women marched and protested in the Soviet Union against the war in Afghanistan. And now in the present war, we're seeing the plowshares actions that have taken place around this country, in which men and women have participated, and also spreading around the world. And I'm reading something recently by Kathy Kelly, in which she was talking about the women in Dublin, plowshares group in Dublin that had attacked I'm trying to imagine these women attacking an airbase. You know, I don't know. I forget what they attacked it with. I think magic markers or something as violent as that. Yeah, and so we're not alone. We know we're not alone. We know that people all over the world are opposed to this war, and more people are opposed to war in general. You know, because it's not just this war. This war at some point will come to an end. It will have to come to an end. They will not be able to find any more soldiers to fight it anymore, and more people are going to resist the fact that our human needs are being ignored in this country while the wealth of this country is being used for war. But, you know, they always cook up another war, and as we see, they're trying to cook up something against Iran, and there's there are lots of places to go to war and lots of possibilities for war. So I think we have to think not just about this war, we have to think about war in general. We have to think about the abolition of war, period. If there's anything that's useful that can happen in this century, drawing upon the lessons of history and lessons of this terrible last century of wars and the beginning of this century of wars, if there's anything that we can accomplish as a result of that, it should be to make this century the century in which war ends as a way of solving the problems of the world. And so people who are gathered here and the people who are gathering in places all over the country, we are part of what I think is a historic movement, just as the people who first gathered in the 1830s to 1840s to do something about slavery, and it took them 30 years in the United States and took them less in other countries. But yes, part of a historic procession towards a different kind of world. Thank you. Sure.
So I don't really know what I want to ask him, except could you speak for about 5 more hours?
Let's compromise.
Okay.
How about 4?
That's it. My question really is...
I want to tell you, it was a pleasure to meet you, because I have admired what you've done for, it's easier for those who have always been outside the establishment. For those who have been inside the establishment and took a chance of being corrupted by it and escaped that corruption and came out fighting, that's something. Yeah. And I hope that answers your question.
Well, now I can't even ask a question. Thank you. No, but really a question. In every one of these dumbass wars, there's a tipping point. And what do you think the tipping point's going to be here? I mean, give us the hope that, we're on the right path, that we're kicking butt. We're going to get these jerks in this White House and this Congress on the way to seeing the light that this thing's got to happen. But do you think is there a tipping point that we're reaching?
I think we're moving towards it. I think a crucial tipping point will be the inability of the government to maintain the loyalty and support of the troops. I think there's more and more rebellion not yet manifesting itself, but the signs of it, growing signs of disaffection in the armed forces. Well, look how difficult it is for them to recruit people. Look at the lengths to which they have to go to recruit them, barging into the high schools, using the No Child Left Behind Act, of all things, using the No Child Left Behind Act as a way of getting the records of high school. They're desperate for recruits. and their recruiters are so desperate that their recruiters are committing crimes. If you notice that, there have been reports of terrible things done by the recruiters as a way of trying to lure people into the military. So, I mean, to me, if there's any tipping point, it has to do with what's going to happen with their ability to sustain a military force. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Last night here, Ray McGovern was referring to an article in Time magazine about possibility of organizing for an attack on Iran. And last week I was at a meeting with George Soros and another meeting of the New America Foundation about the framing of this as a binary option, either not bombing or bombing. And it seems like there are a lot of signals that they may be preparing for an October surprise. And before the last war, there was a fake debate. And I think they learned from that. This time there's almost no debate, and it seems like there's some manipulation going on. I'm wondering what you think, what your sense is about that potential for taking military, for bombing Iran before the election.
Oh, you mean that would be the surprise?
Yeah.
But except that we wouldn't be surprised.
Right.
There's nothing surprises us anymore about this administration. But is it possible that they will bomb Iran before? Well, I don't know. You know. This administration is capable of anything, however irrational, however immoral. Desperation may lead them to do. If they see electoral defeat coming, if they see, the American people becoming more and more disaffected, as they are becoming more and have been from the war, it's conceivable they might think that they will get a splurge of support as a result of another war, another bombing. They might think that, and therefore they might do it. I don't know. Well, our problem, I think, is not to predict what they will do. Our problem is to preempt what they will do by telling the truth about the situation with Iran. And by reminding people of what happened with Iran, by reminding people of how, and this sort of a basic thing that people have to be reminded of again and again. That is, the government's interests are not the same as our interests. This is not a country where we can talk about a national interest in which the government's interest and the people's interests are the same. The government has its own interests. And those interests have nothing to do with the human rights of the American people or people anywhere else. And so we have to do what we can to tell the truth about the situation in Iran, to point out things that the cowardly press is not pointing out whenever Iran comes up. This whole idea of, creating this fear of Iran having possibly a nuclear. There's a lot of education that has to be done about Iran, nuclear weapons, and a few little bits of information. Like the international group that monitors what's going on in Iran, and it tells us that they talk about enriching uranium. They've got the country sort of scared about the idea of enriching uranium, and in order to have one nuclear bomb, they have to enrich uranium to a point of 80%, and the Iranians have already started to enrich uranium, and they've gotten up to 3.5%. You see, and all people have to also understand that the Nuclear Anti-Proliferation Treaty not only asks that no new nations acquire nuclear weapons, it requires that the nations that already have nuclear weapons begin to divest themselves of nuclear weapons. And I think it's important, it's important to point out, and people who know anything at all about Iran and about nuclear weapons will say, well, it's conceivable they might have a nuclear weapon in 5 years. Which was the same thing they were saying about Iraq. So here's a simple thing that people should think about and people should be told about. Iran might have a nuclear weapon in 5 years. The United States has 10,000 nuclear weapons in 1 minute. I mean, right now.
Targeted on hair trigger alert.
So where's the hypocrisy? Why the hysteria? If we're going to be hysterical, let's be hysterical about the United States possessing all these nuclear weapons, and who is more dangerous? What leader in the country? And yes, there are really terrible leaders all over the world, but is there any leader more dangerous than this particular leader who has command of 10,000 nuclear weapons? I don't think so. So we have an educational job to do.
I know, Howard, you've grappled a lot over the years, particularly since 2000, about giving people recommendations about voting and the lesser of two evils question. We have elections coming up in November. Some of us are part of a coalition campaign that is asking people to take a pledge to only vote for candidates who are calling for a speedy withdrawal from Iraq and no future wars of aggression. And we get a lot of people coming to us and say, don't you understand, the most important thing is that the Democrats take back the House. So how do you answer that question?
There's no point having the Democrats take back the House if it's going to be a house of war. After all, we can't trust the Democratic Party on the question of war. So many of them, the majority of them, voted for the war. The pledge that you're talking about, Medea, is, I think, a pledge that should be spread around the country, a very important pledge to tell the candidates who run, look, if you do not pledge to get us out of Iraq as soon as possible, then we are not going to vote for you. I think the people, the Democrats, and even Republicans who run should be aware of how many people are taking that pledge, and it might have a healthy effect.
On that note, and can you drop your pledge? This was not staged, but now it is. Okay, cameras. We'll do that afterwards.
And Medea, the website for this is? We're going to do it again. Okay. The website. We're going to do this again. Okay. Give Peace a Vote. These are powerful women. Give Peace a Vote. And there's a website. You could do this at the Code Pink website, codepink.org, or you could do this. You can also go to votersforpeace.us, votersforpeace.us, or to codepink.org. And folks, in the interest of time, Howard Zinn has a very jam-packed schedule. We're going to give him...
That's givepeaceavote.org or codepinkalert.org.
Okay. And we're going to go to the back of the room. We're going to have a book signing at that table in the back, so if folks can help us clear that table, Howard Zinn's going to come and sign some books.
And can you send us those photos to info@codepinkalert.org? We got to get them up on the website. Thank you.